Today talk is informal. It's more of a high-level concept of what we're thinking regarding the makeup of the plan, what the structure and the inside content will look like. It is a skeleton. It is what we call a starting point, but we've been putting a lot of thinking into it. But what you see in front of you is an outline that we put together. I'm going to refer to it, but most of the content is in these presentations. The outline is a little more complete in terms of specifically what the individual sections would look like. Last workshop, you all had a lot of questions as to how the three workshops that you had participated in, how all that content and information you provided would culminate into the document. And so, of course, we had it in our mind what to do, but we wanted to be able to share that with you. So going back to the purpose of this and how we designed the stakeholder process, first of all, we talked about the 4 different methods through which the stakeholder engagement process has been occurring. This is through the method 1, which is the 6 facilitated workshops. We finished all of the regional listening sessions under method 2. We have been ongoing doing combined conferences and other events and talking about this and getting feedback from different constituents. For example, last week I was able to get the Environmental Stewardship Initiative business groups. There's about 100 or so that have committed to zero waste in all environmental media. They were present for their annual meeting, and I was able to present this topic and get their input on those initial surveys and values that you all did the voting exercise in the first workshop. So that was useful. I'm going to another NCMA workshop in the coming weeks, so we're adding a lot of external input into this process. And there's an ongoing online input that's on our website. Aside from that, while we're doing the discussions and prioritization, our team is also doing some technical analysis and providing some background documents and information to other groups that have offered to do analysis on their own. We're not dictating the process or what they do, but we're making sure that the way they're going about is going to be, the end product's going to be useful in the manner that's usable in the report, but the initial starting point and assumptions are consistent. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the work Dallas and other folks are going to be doing in what we call the high-level energy and emissions modeling. And then finally, the whole goal is to develop actions, recommendations related to policy actions, regulatory actions, administrative actions, and other kinds of initiatives that can be taken between the public and the private sector. Just a reminder, the purpose of the first 2 workshops was to create a vision of our energy future by examining what our current landscape is and looking at what's happening around the state and looking at other examples and coming up with an approach and what we value, what we consider most to maintain going forward, and areas where we feel like changes are needed, small changes to large changes. All that was part of the workshops 1 and 2. If you have forgotten what that was about or you weren't here, you're welcome to go to our website. All of the presentations are videotaped and all the materials are posted. We don't videotape any of the conversations, so that's the only part that's not there. Workshops 3 and 4, that was last time we talked about what the changing landscape is across the country. That's where a lot of the concepts related to the regulatory reform process occurring in the states, the utility business model, grid modernization, a lot of those concepts were brought to your attention, and resulting from that is Workshop 4, which contains some of the topic-specific memorandums that each group has prepared. And so moving forward, I'm sorry the slide's missing here on Workshops 4 and 5. Moving forward, what we're trying to do is the last 2 workshops are going to be bringing that funnel down into some priority recommendations. And most of my discussion today is going to talk about that. So this slide right here is about what the structure looks like. The main part of this exercise is, let me just show over here. is our stakeholder engagement process is right here. So majority of the content is coming from here, but there are some related efforts that are going on, and today you're going to hear from two of them, and then in workshop number 5, we're going to bring other audiences to present what's going on. We also have a variety of things going on, the emissions and energy modeling space. You'll be hearing from 2 organizations today, and then we'll have about 3 to 4 folks coming next time, to talk about what they have discovered through their energy modeling exercises. Our team is preparing some background documents on what North Carolina's energy resources are, and the outline talks about which areas we're covering. And I'm sorry, I forgot to put onshore and offshore wind. That should be part of this part 3 in the outline. It should be in there. It's just I was rushing last night. Coming back to this side right here, we're also developing a background document what the historical energy landscape in North Carolina is in terms of not only generation, but the demand for electricity, how that's changing, how the various regulations and policy actions have influenced that changing landscape, and what that landscape is telling us in the current business as usual or policies on the books, what they are telling us in terms of what the energy outlook looks like, but also what the carbon emissions profile looks like historically and by 2030 to 2033. I think those are the years we went out to. Yes, Tobin.
I see it says carbon emissions. Is that then not including methane? It's just carbon? Or
this is carbon dioxide equivalent.
Okay, so greenhouse. And then is it looking at like the life cycle emissions of the fuel, or just what's being generated?
These are direct emissions from a generation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Question on carbon emissions. Chris Harlan, Energy Environment. Haven't done a lot of this in the landfill field, and also I'm part-time farmer. Okay. One thing I'm seeing missing is carbon emissions from land development, water influence farmers. It seems that energy is completely separate from the land use discussion and from the water discussion. It's going to be tough.
So to just, I won't get into the detail. We have done a full statewide, economy-wide emissions inventory of greenhouse gases. There we've looked at every sector that contribute to carbon GHG emissions. We even looked at the land use sector. And so since Clean Energy Plan is one component of the entire greenhouse gas inventory, we're looking at this one aspect. It's not a holistic look at the state greenhouse gas inventory in this particular plan. That is, the inventory is available, and we're using that in other parts of EO80 to look at what mitigation and sequestration activities are affecting those emissions profile in the future.
Does this include the overlap, though, in land use as it applies to energy?
No, these are direct emissions for now. That this is the same method that federal agencies do their analysis for energy sector. Okay, and then coming down to the last, we're going to just do a report on what the energy jobs and economic outlook looks like related to the energy sector, which we're just going to compile what we know currently and the most recent information from the various sources. If we can, we're going to integrate Department of Commerce's workforce assessment study. We're working with them, and they're doing some modeling, and we're sharing some of our initial scenarios that were modeled in right here. Okay. So the report itself, the main body would be the recommendations, what we call policy and actions recommendations. That'll be hopefully no more than 30, 40 pages, executive summary-like kind of a report. The content of that are in the outline. And if you notice in the outline, refer to it on page 2, we're broken down into section 3, which is electric sector transformation in process. This is what we learned and heard between workshops 1 and 4. That'll be all brought into here. Section 5 is what our vision and goals are, and that'll be, some of the voting exercises you did, some of the answers, and you recall you broke out into work groups, and you had a vision statement in those work groups. We're going to bring that into this particular section. And then we'll also prioritize what your guiding principles were and what you value the most in terms of, remember, your values in terms of equity, in terms of affordability, reliability, resiliency, safety. I mean, there were like almost 20 different parameters through which we had some prioritization and discussions. So those values to uphold and promote moving forward will be brought into that section. And we also talked a lot about what's working, what are the successes of our system as a whole, and where we see challenges going forward. So this is going to lay the framework and the foundation for reasoning why the recommendations are provided in the way they are. So the reader or the user of this document, eventually the authority that which would be taking action, has some background and understanding that we're not just plopping these recommendations just because we felt like it, but there has some logic and there's some consensus and some drivers behind it. And the presentation of those recommendations, our thoughts are we would break it down into 11 focus areas. The first 7 focus areas are consistent with the 7 work groups that you all broke down into in the third workshop, and through which we're going to listen to the memos and the results of those workshops. We've added number 8, 9, and 10. Which is develop pathways to further decarbonize the electric power sector. And number 9, which is increase clean energy economic development opportunities. And number 10, increase use of energy efficiency and demand-side management programs. And number 11, electrification. These focus areas were discussed, but not necessarily we spread out and talked amongst our work groups. So as a whole, we have 11 focus areas through which these recommendations can be developed. I went ahead and gave you some examples of the focus area 1. There are 12 recommendations, actions. We're not promoting this at this point. These are just illustrative for your use. So these are illustrative in use. I got this from the memo that the customer access to clean energy resources had identified. I did this in fairly hurried fashion, but we wanted to make sure you got a little bit of flavor for some of the stronger recommendations that they were saying, and some that were, wouldn't be considered that much of a hurdle to achieve. But we went ahead and split that up into who would be the entity that would be responsible, or that would be the key leader in making those recommendations happen. And we feel like this is important to do. So in these recommendations, the legislative actions would be required, so the legislature would be the entity. And then we have the Utilities Commission identified, the utilities, the governor's office, agencies like mine, DOT, Commerce, local governments, higher education, and private sector. If you all think that this is not a good way to present this, I would love some ideas. I've even thought about putting a secondary matrix that has these recommendations, but we have another matrix that puts the values or priorities that we've identified, like does it hit carbon reductions, does it hit reliability, does it hit resiliency, does it hit affordability, social equity, and we can do that matrix for each of these recommendations to see which ones give the most benefits if we act upon it. So,
is there any time feature with that? Easy to do, hard to do, how long to implement, cost to implement? I mean, that feels like that plays into what people are going to look at.
I've seen that happen or being done like that, and we can talk about that after I'm done, and Lauren is going to engage you in those questions. But there's different ways of presenting this. Our goal in the recommendations part of the report is just keep it a very high level, okay? And you're right, some of those decisions are going to be part of that process. And as I mentioned, these are the rest of the focus areas. I'm not going to read through it, but between now and I think we're going to give you a date through which we want the comments by. Take a look at these and see if you have any edits, changes. But this is going to be our buckets through which we start thinking the recommendations. Just a few words about energy modeling. The purpose of energy modeling, we as a team, Paula and I come from a very analytical world from air quality, and we've done energy forecasting, demand side forecasting, emissions and energy modeling for a lot of industrial sources, as well as the power sector, transportation sector. And we felt like from day one, as this executive order was signed, that we needed some ability to understand what our business as usual case leads us to, what pathway in terms of energy mix, the price, cost of electricity, and the emissions profile. And so we started talking about what are the different ways we could analyze different policy scenarios. Unfortunately, we didn't have the time and the energy or the resources to actually do the energy modeling, but some folks approached us. The goal of the energy modeling in Dallas, and then we'll do a little bit of background, is basically defining the capacity growth, or the current capacity, and what we project the future capacity growth to be. What our energy demand is in terms of both our whole sector that supplies the electricity. Part of that demand is influenced by the changes in the transportation and the electrification sector. So that demand is increasing or decreasing depending on how you look at the different drivers of that electrification segment. The costs are a driver, so having the most current and most up-to-date costs, especially for renewables and the changing technologies, is really important in looking at what's 5-10 years down the road. Rules and policies are really the backdrop of whether or not what we project by 2025 and 2030 are realistic enough. This rules and policies are important to make sure we project the business as usual as accurate as possible. And the goal of modeling is to come up with output, and that is new builds. That means, are we going to build new natural gas? Are we going to build new renewables? Are we not going to build a power plant because we have more energy efficiency occurring, or we have better demand-side management programs in place? All of that happens in this analysis and through the dispatch output. Emissions are big important, and we're right now looking at just GHG emissions, but we have the ability to do NOx and SOx and PM emissions and the electricity rates. These are the folks that we've been in discussions with over several months. Resources for the Future are going to talk about their results. North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association, they're going to talk about what they did. NRDC and us, we've been talking for a while, and they're going to present their results next time in June. NC State is doing TOMOA modeling. They're going to include storage analysis, and we're trying to get them to talk about it next time. Georgetown Climate Center has just approached us yesterday, and they have finished North Carolina's analysis. The policies that they're looking at are all varying. Some are looking at carbon trading policies, some are looking at more renewables, more energy efficiency. We didn't dictate what policies they looked at. And EPA's offered to do some electric vehicle modeling, and we've been in discussions with them. We're not sure whether the timing will work out to share the results before the plan is due. And I know I'm going over, but okay. And then one last thing is, while the stakeholder activities are going on, there's a variety of groups that have completed or are in parallel doing other stakeholder work. EDF is going to talk about their cities initiative, which DEQ was involved in, but majority of the major local governments, cities and towns participated in that effort, and Zach's going to go over their findings and their recommendations. Jen Weiss is heading a massive effort on the energy efficiency roadmap, and she's going to talk about their recommendations that are coming out in the next June meeting. And then David Doctor is going to talk about the Southeast Energy Innovation Collaborative, and they have a series of recommendations that they have put together, and that'll be part of the conversation also. Finally, our schedule. This is a very tight schedule. As soon as we are done with Workshop 6, we hope to have most of the content done. We're going to be presenting the recommendations and getting your input through the next 2 workshops. But we're anticipating going out to public comment between August 12th and ending around September 4th. It's going to be less than a 3-week public comment period, but it shouldn't be any surprises to you because you'd be part of that process. And most of the recommendations you have seen or heard, you may have not seen the entire document together. Our goal is to bring it to the council by the end of September. We're scheduling that council meeting in Raleigh the last week of September, where DOT and Commerce and other agencies will be presenting their reports, and then finally we'll present it to the governor in October.